back to the Masters of Modern MMcast podcast, episode 400. I am your host, Alex Kessler, here with my co-host, Ben Bateman. It's a big deal. 400 episodes for a podcast is a lot of podcasting. So many hours, and there are people that listen to this podcast still that have been listening since the very beginning. There are others that have gone through at some point and listened to every episode that they've gone through. You know what's one thing I will say is a lot of people talk about how difficult it is to watch all of One Piece. And I would say, I think we have more hours of this podcast recorded than total hours of One Piece episodes recorded.
If you average our podcast episodes to 90 minutes, because I think often they're close to that, and there's some of the old ones are like 2 to 3 hours, but if that's the case, then that means this would be 600 hours of Magic podcasts plus all of the like pre-shows and extra content. But like if you just listened, then it's, let's say it's 500 to 600 hours. One Piece is how long? 22 minutes, something like that?
It's 20 minutes of, I think I like have actually done the math, and it's like 17 minutes on average of content per episode.
So yeah, we're rivaling freaking One Piece here with our content output.
It sounds like we beat it. I mean, 17, like 1,000 times 17, 1,000 times 20, or divided by 3, right? Because it's 20 minutes an hour. So that's 330 hours. If our podcast is just an hour long each, not even 90 minutes at 400 episodes.
I would argue of comparable quality, our two shows. They're pretty close.
The world building from the Masters of Modern podcast, the character development, the fact that neither of us have found the One Piece is all pointing to, you're right. You heard it here, 400th this place, better than One Piece.
Yeah, speaking of finding the One Piece, there will be a conversation in tonight's episode about the craziest thing that has happened to Magic in a long time. There is a finding the One Piece level scavenger hunt happening at the moment in the Magic world, which is part of tonight's episode, which is going to be
and so we are as time honored tradition. Our first episode was reviewing Khans of Turkey with fetch lands being added to the format, and this episode will be reviewing a set. It'll be reviewing the Lord of the Rings, Magic the Gathering Tales of Middle Earth set that is coming out. For the most part, I believe most of the preview cards have been previewed. There's some stragglers that are still coming in, but we're pretty much all there. And this is Modern Horizons 3. So for those who don't know, Modern generally only receives cards through standard set printings. Now 2 times, Modern Horizons 1 and Modern Horizons 2 sets have been printed with the intent of directly printing cards into the Modern format. And the Lord of the Rings set, one of the unique features of it, beyond it being the first Universes Beyond draft format they've printed, is that the set is being printed directly into Modern. So this is Modern Horizons 3. Now, a few episodes ago, we did have a big conversation kind of surrounding the idea of like, will the power level of this need to be as high as Modern Horizons 1 or 2? Modern Horizons 1 and 2 needed to have high power level to sell packs, right? They needed a Ragavan to make you to pay for that set. This set doesn't need that. It has 6 different variants of Gandalf or Sauron, and has like 40 different Frodos in the set. So there's a large fandom for those properties, of course, including us. And so I think my overall opinion of what I've seen so far is I don't think this set is as powerful as either of the Modern Horizon sets.
No, I definitely not. There's a lot of cards in this set that are purely flavorful, that are very cool. Design is really fun. There are some really good cards. The interesting thing about this set is that the type of player that is the most interested in buying for like aesthetic and lore, for like the essentially the aesthetic, is the player who is less interested, I think, by and large, in like the spiky version of Magic. It's not to say that there's not crossover, because I think there is, but I think people who want to deck out their decks with characters and images and art they love and cool things are going to be very attracted to this set. And that player base is Commander largely. That is the type of Magic player that is hyped on that is a slightly more casual, likes to hype their decks up. So what's interesting about this is that the card design here is a little different than the first 2 Horizon sets, where I'm sure there was Commander in mind. You can distinctly tell they've split the design philosophy down the middle a bit, where there is powerful eternal level cards all throughout the set. There's also cards that distinctly read, this is going to be super fun to play in Commander. this is legendary. This is another version of a legendary character. Like there's a lot of that in here. And I think it's fascinating to look at the cards now and go, they're now card power design, balancing cards differently than they ever have before. And I think this set to me really truly speaks to that more than any set that I've ever seen.
Well, I think there was the jokes and or complaints around Modern Horizons 1 and 2 about like those sets being Commander Masters. Actually, right? We've lived in a world where Commander and Modern and Limited and Standard are all being designed equidistant from each other at the same level. Now, there's arguments to be made that probably Limited is most often the thing these things are being made for, and then there's a secondary run with other things being a focus. Now, one key difference here is that like with the flavor of it, there's a lot of like interesting choices that were made that's going to affect kind of how these cards are designed. One thing I do want to talk about is like the ring and the ring tempts you mechanic, right? Like this is playing in the same space as dungeons and initiative, and the monarch token. And historically, those are things created for multiplayer formats. This is the first. Well, Dungeons was made for 1v1, and then the other ones were made for multiplayer. And I would argue Dungeons was pretty fair. Monarch and the Initiative have broken Pauper and Legacy, respectively, because of their non-testedness for those formats. So it's really interesting to see them kind of keep playing in this space of this extracurricular challenge token. And so I'm gonna briefly explain it because it is really relevant as we go through all the cards that we're going through in this set. What does the ring tempting you mean? What does it do? And then we can talk a little bit about the flavor of it. So the ring tempts you. As the ring tempts you, you get an emblem named the ring. If you don't have one, then your emblem gains its next ability, and you choose a creature you control to become or remain your ring bearer. So basically, it means an emblem that acts very similar to a saga, right? It's a thing, and then every time you get tempted, it moves down the saga path, and then it is always chosen onto a creature. So you have a creature in play that is the ring bearer who has the ring, and the ring can tempt you even if you don't control a creature, so you can keep increasing which level you're on even without a creature. The ring gains its abilities in order from top to bottom. Once it gains an ability, it has that ability for the rest of the game. That's it going down like a saga. Each time the ring tempts you, you must choose a creature if you control one. So you can't, if you have a creature, you can't not tempt the creature.
Right.
And then each player can have only one emblem named the ring and only one ring bearer at a time. So this, you do not, you're not trading it back and forth. You have your own, the ring, they have their own emblem for the ring. You're not sharing the ring like Initiative. And you can't have more than one. You don't double up on rings. And so the rings in order are the ring. Your ring bearer is legendary and can't be blocked by creatures with greater power. The next ability is whenever your ring bearer attacks, draw a card, then discard a card. So this now can't be blocked by creatures with greater power. And then the next step, it adds you, when it attacks, draw a card, then discard a card. Then if you get tempted again, whenever your ring bearer becomes blocked by a creature, that creature's controller sacrifices at the end of combat. And then one more time, whenever your ring bearer deals combat damage to a player, each opponent loses 3 life. So if you fully tempt, it can't be blocked by creatures with power that are greater than it. If it's blocked by something with smaller power, it kills it. You draw a card, then discard a card. And then if you do damage, each opponent, including the one you do damage to, loses 3 life. So one big complaint about this mechanic, and I want to get your vibe on this as a Lord of the Rings stan, maniac, as you will. This is all upside. The ring tempts you is a 100% beneficial to you mechanic. There's no downside, which is very different than kind of, I think, what a lot of people consider the ring. Like when the ring tempts you, it's supposed to corrupt you and make you less than. Right. Frodo at the end of Lord of the Rings doesn't look as good as Frodo at the beginning. Gimli or Gollum looks way worse 1,000 years after getting the ring than when he first got it and looked like a normal person. So what's your thoughts on that?
Specifically, are you specifically asking on the flavor, or do you want me to break down my opinion on the whole mechanic?
Yeah, the whole thing. Flavor was what I was asking about, but if you have opinions that are not flavor based, which you generally do, I'm fine hearing those as well.
First with flavor, it's weird that the downside of the One Ring is only represented in the One Ring card that we're going to talk about later, which is hardly a downside. But they decided to put the like ring hurts you effect on that card as opposed to the ring tempts you mechanic, which is interesting. And it means, I think probably the theory there was, we don't want the one exciting thing that everybody knows, this ring, to be like a downside. We want it to be something that if you get it, feels cool. And if so, I think that that's probably why. I think they needed to be another mode. The next mode is you go to one life, and then the next mode is you lose. Probably is what needs to happen. Is my guess. From a mechanical standpoint, despise this. I hate all of these effects. I hate them. I probably hate them about as much as I've ever hated anything from a Magic design perspective. And that's not just unique to this card or sorry, this set. That's the same for dungeons. I feel the same way. I don't feel the same way about the Monarch. Actually, the Monarch I'm fine with. I don't have any issues with the Monarch. The Initiative is my least favorite of all of them. I think it's the one that I hate the most. This is at least, the ring tempts you refers to one sequence, only one path. And there isn't another path you can confuse it with because there's never been another ring in another set this could be confused with. So the reason the Initiative bothers me so much is because it's its own specific dungeon in a type of mechanic where there's other dungeons you can go into, and it's hard to remember which dungeon is which, and it's a specific dungeon. Anyway, that being said, those we already talked about.
I think like between the two, that like offers its own little mini game. This is ostensibly just a like you get a legendary Rancor that like has an ability built into it. Every time it triggers, you can move it to a new creature and it levels up, right? Like that is a card that could have been printed not as an emblem. That could just be a token that exists that acts more like a classic mechanic.
The reason I mean, this is clear to you, and I think other people that have listened to my opinion on this stuff have heard this, but just as a reminder, my issue with these things, the Monarch says this is what the Monarch does. It says it on most of the Monarch cards. Maybe as time went on, they stopped printing it as much, but it's explained and it's very simple. I can take, just like any of us do for a token in a game of Limited, I take a backwards land and I put it face down and I say that I'm the Monarch. Here's my Monarch. If you deal damage to me in combat, you take this card and you're the Monarch. And this is what Monarch does. I draw at the end of my turn. Boom, done. That's it. That's what the Monarch does. It's very simple. This is an emblem. Planeswalkers that say you get an emblem, it says what the emblem does. So again, face down card represents an emblem that is represented by a card that I have in my deck. So I can refer back to that for reference. My issue with, I think, Magic's short-sighted design with Paper Magic is that this is relevant only insofar as these sets are printed. In 5 or 6 years, when people aren't playing this set and they don't have a copy of what the ring tempts you does in front of them, and it says the ring tempts you, nobody will have any idea what that means or what it does. And it's the same problem I have with dungeons. You have to, like, I have a sleeved copy of the Undercity now in my Highlander box, so I can avoid bad cell service the next time we do a Magic tournament, like a Big Bear, right? Like if I don't know what the Undercity does and I take an Initiative card and I don't have cell service, like I don't know what I'm doing. And that's a problem.
I agree that during the preview season and when I was doing kind of the review for this set and figuring out which cards to pick, it was a little bit better. And I assume that once you play this, it plays really kind of easily, which I don't think is true of dungeons, right? I think this is a better mechanic than like in some, for just the other side, I like the dungeon mechanic. I have a commander deck built around the dungeon mechanic. I think it's a pretty cool mechanic. I've actually never had the Initiative in play in front of me, so I can't speak towards that at all. And yeah, I think Monarch's great. But the ring, every time I read a card during preview season on like, what does a ring card do? I would just ignore that feature on the card. No idea what it meant. Didn't really care. It was hard to keep track of what that meant. And it's hard to keep track of the in context of power level even for a card. So I decided to not remember. Now, it just makes it harder. It gives it a version of Menace that lets it loot. And that's like, those are the two key ones, right?
Basically gives it death touch and then like does extra damage. So like that's the thing about this design that I'm like a little bit more sympathetic to. And I want to make it very clear to everybody, I'm absolutely gangbusters excited for this set. And I'm happy to be proven wrong on this particular mechanic because I don't think that this is the biggest sin. I just think this type of design, which to be fair to Wizards and all of the folks that we know who make the game over there, like you have to explore new design space. And I will always commend exploring new, powerful, cool design space than just doing safe, boring things, because the game gets stale if you do that. So you got to take the swings that you can. And this is a specific mechanic to mimic a piece of storytelling that we all just love. So I get it. I understand why they're doing this.
And to your point, to the point of the question on like the flavor of it being no downside, I think two things. One, I think it does create an interesting downside for the creature you have to pick. Like the fact that you have to make this creature something that your opponent needs to kill is like an interesting flavor similarity. And most importantly, like I think just from a gameplay perspective, having a negative made it so people didn't want to use this at all, right? Like I think already people are resistant to this type of thing, and so and if you put a downside on it, people would just stop trying. Like right there, it would make it.
Frodo has the ring. They don't want to kill Frodo. They want to take the ring from Frodo.
Right.
They don't care about killing Frodo if they take the ring from Frodo. So like the killing the creature aspect of it is kind of like it's almost like the Monarch would make more sense. That's like a type of ability that would play more flavorfully. I think that though the 4 abilities we described, it remains. Can you tempt more than once in a turn?
Yeah.
So this is possible that in the same way that the initiative was confusing and then it became very clear very fast, this is the most busted thing ever, like so unfairly good. It's very possible that there's going to be enough things that say tempt and it's easy to do where you can tempt 2 or even 3 times in a turn quite easily and your bananas bear becomes crazy. But it's also very possible that this is like kind of marginal upside. Like it's kind of like slow.
It basically is like target creature gets +3/+0 is unblockable and loots when it attacks with a lot of effort to make that happen. And it's very hard to make that happen before turn 4. And so on turn 4, if you're like, my thing is unblockable and +3/+0, I don't think that's breaking Modern in half.
Also, just so I'm clear, it happens the first time, then the second time. Then if they kill the creature and a new thing tempts, it starts over, right? That new creature?
No. Once you have it, you have it.
Okay. So that new creature has all those abilities then?
Yes.
Yeah. It's not going to break Modern. It's good though.
Yeah. It's not bad. I think it's fine, right? And it's the way it's used in the set, which we'll talk about some of the cards we think will be Modern playable. We have 30 cards to go over. We'll see how much we get through. But the way it's kind of brought up in Modern is these cards. It's almost like an added bonus to cards, right? Like I don't right now. I don't think I've seen any cards, and we might be wrong for the reason you said with initiative that like you're not playing a card that uses this mechanic to use this mechanic. You're playing the card because it's good, and then this mechanic will be brought into Modern because of the fact that it can take advantage of. It just has this as a cool added trinket feature.
Yeah, I think my last thought on the ring tempting and all that is that it's also fairly insular design in the sense that unless the set is so popular and they decide to make 5 more of them, or ring tempting, it gets retemplated into something else. That we're stuck with whatever the design philosophy was with exactly this set, which is never going to be so game breaking. Specifically, just this one set. Like, yeah. I guess Initiative kind of is, but even those cards, there's only a couple that are actually really good.
Yeah. So let's get into the cards. The first card.
Well, hang on. Before you say that, just because I know we did announce it was the 400th episode, but I want to just take a quick second to shout sponsors out and also just thank you. So before we get into talking about the 30 cards, just a quick thank you to everybody who's watching or listening to the episode. 400 episodes also equates to 9.5 years of Alex and my life. We have been friends since 2010, and this show started about 2 months before I came on board in 2014. So collectively, you've done it for 9.5 going on. I'm just over 9 years. It's a lot of time to be with one thing and still doing the same thing. And those of you that are with us and have been with us since the beginning, we thank you. If anybody has found it more recently that's listening, we're happy to have you here. And through all the years, every partner that has supported us, we're very appreciative of that. Alex and I are doing more and more content other places now. TikTok has become like a major focus for you over the last couple of years for Magic. And I've started to post more recently on the Masters of Modern TikTok, which has been super, super fun. So, if you're still engaging with the content that we do here, and a big thank you, obviously, to Channel Fireball as our home and our sponsor of the show. yeah, I'm just excited to be still doing it, and it makes me happy to.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a big achievement. We're really excited. Thank you everyone who keeps watching and listening and supporting and to another 400 episodes. Let's get to we gotta beat One Piece, right? We just gotta keep tracking to 800 episodes.
And the patrons, a big cheers to you guys for still supporting us all through all this, being here. So, and to the patrons for, all these years you guys have been supporting and continue to help make this show happen. So Alex and I have cool stuff in the Magic world coming that we'll be able to talk about shortly. But you guys and everybody have continued to support us getting here. It's great to see Magic in a new place. And I think we're both really happy to be a part of it as it expands into this kind of new era of post-COVID conventions and releases and all that.
Absolutely. Yep. All right. Ready to talk some Lord of the Rings cards? Ready to Lord of the Rings it up? You're gonna go on an adventure. Are you ready to go on an adventure?
Yes.
All right,
Yes.
all
I wish
right.
you had said. I wish you had just looked at me and said, I wish the ring had never come to me," and I could have said Gandalf's whole speech right there. That would have been good, but we didn't do that. So, all right.
Maybe that'll happen. The Dawn of the New Age, 1 and a white enchantment. Dawn of the New Age enters the battlefield with a hope counter on it for each creature you control. At the beginning of your end step, remove a hope counter from Dawn of the New Age. If you do, draw a card. Then, if Dawn of the New Age has no hope counters on it, sacrifice it and you gain 4 life. It is a mythic rare enchantment. This is a pretty, for white, getting this type of card draw is pretty bonkers.
Yeah, the card's very good. The most important 2 things to pay attention to are, number 1, it is an enchantment, which means there are things that have been printed that can take advantage of this. It's blinkable in just the basic sense of it just being a blinkable permanent. It's an easy thing to blink. You draw at end step, which is really, really important. That's one of the things that stands out about this card is that it comes down and it's going to be it's white, draw 1 for 2 if you have a creature. It's like pretty good,
right?
Right? Like over the course of 2 turns, this is white, draw 2 for 2 if you have 2 creatures.
Like revitalizes a playable, has seen play at different times in Modern, right? Not often, but and that's 1 white, 1 and a white, draw a card, gain 3 life, and this will accomplish that if you have 1 creature in play when you play it, right?
Yeah, there are a couple different places that I can think of this really where you take the most advantage of it. I think just it curving out on turn 2 after you play a 1-drop creature in any deck is fine. It's fine. On its own, just on face value, it allows you to keep 2 mana hands and things like that. There is the version of this that plays in a revitalized affinity deck, because those affinity decks that are often white based are going to have the ability to ramp quickly, as well as play 0 mana creatures. So this can come down on turn 2 in those decks with 2 creatures and play very easily, almost without even blinking, maybe even 3 creatures in some cases. And I do think that that's pretty good. But I think overall this card is pretty nuts. Do you think this?
I think in a deck that is putting a lot on the board as far as creatures goes and wants a way to kind of draw out if they're playing against a control deck also in your sideboard, I think this offers an interesting angle of attack. They're humans or Soul Sisters obviously haven't been playable, but both of those decks can turn on the same way that Merfolk did with the right cards being printed.
I mentioned the enchantment angle. Do you think this does anything to push Sithis and Enchantress decks into a little bit more actually playable?
I don't think this card alone does that. Do I think that if a Enchantress deck that focuses a little bit more on creatures that are enchantments has potential of seeing play, does this have a home in that shell? Yes, right. It's a enchantment that's good enough that draws a card when you play it, that chains in with other creatures that you're playing. I think it definitely has a potential of being decent in that type of deck. But it would have to be in a type of deck that's doing that type of game plan, that's leaning into enchantment style creatures or a lot of creatures for whatever reason, not the stacksy versions of an Enchantress deck that wouldn't then want this. Next card, which I know you're excited by, Boromir, Warden of the Tower. 2 white, legendary creature, human soldier, vigilance. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, if no mana was spent to cast it, counter that spell. Sacrifice Boromir, Warden of the Tower. Creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. The ring tempts you. 3/3. Farewell, Aragorn, to go to Minas Tirith and save my people. You do not simply walk a elemental onto the battlefield when Boromir is there, because it will be countered.
Give me a moment, for pity's sake. He is my favorite character in all of Lord of the Rings. He's the hero of the story, as we all think can agree when we talk about Boromir. This
The
card is
fact
quite
that
good.
the Fellowship betrayed him and didn't give him the ring to use to save his people, really, the Fellowships are the real villains in this story.
Agreed. I do think that I would have followed you into Mordor. My brother, my captain, my king is one of my favorite movie lines of all time. Makes me cry every time. But I know that it's Boromir from the books, not the movie. This card's good. I mean, it's a human. It's a good human. It does cost 3. It's a 3-mana 3/3. It has that front facing ability, which is it's like you have like a selfless spirit kind of stapled onto this thing. You have a little bit of that. What's Lavinia? What's the blue white spell that mana if mana more than equal to lands they control, it's countered. It's like that bear.
Yeah. Lavinia.
Lavinia. It's got some of that flavor to it. Humans decks traditionally struggle when things cost more than 2. Like if it costs more than 2, it's like a real commitment. Like that. Those slots are very, very competitive. And so as good as this is, and I think this could easily be a 1-drop in a deck like that. I don't know. There's not enough soldiers that a soldiers deck could be a thing, right? I mean, I know there's a ton of soldiers.
I think it's humans is the thing that you would want this played in. I think it has 2 benefits over Lavinia, or 3. One, it like Vigilance 3/3 is bigger than like what Lavinia by like a
2
decent
2
amount.
Yeah.
I think that more importantly, the ability to sack it to give all your creatures indestructible. Like in like 3 different ways, this protects you against Fury. It also is good against Force Negation. It's also good against right. Like it's a card that fights a lot of the removal of the format currently on an axis that other things don't. So I think that's really beneficial. I do think your point, it's 3 mana, which does make it a fair bit of an ask. We've been a long while since Collected Company was a massive force in the format, but I think it does a lot of interesting things, and also, it tempts you with the ring, which is an ability that might be relevant. But I think this has potential of seeing play, but I don't know if it's going to be consistent.
Yeah, the thing I was going to say was, I mean, from a ring tempting perspective, this is exactly the kind of card that like the ring tempting you is really good on, because this card's good even without that stuff. It's all just incidental value, right?
Yeah.
It's just gonna beef the creature up. And I think the other thing about this that does stand out is you mentioned it already, but the fact that the selfless spirit ability is now on a human, which classically like that, selfless spirit, and then I think locks it on hierarch or whichever the 3 or 4 drop was that used to get played. Like those are creatures that never fit the tribal type that those decks wanted. And so this also stops more than just, I mean, I know you mentioned Force of Negation and Fury, but it also stops Solitude.
All right, Flowering of the White Tree, white legendary enchantment. Legendary creatures you control get +2/+1 and have ward 1. Non-legendary creatures you control get +1/+1.
Card's really good. I don't know how good it actually is for modern. I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, there's a whole design philosophy thing with this set where you're not designing for standard, you're splitting it between Eternal formats and Commander. I don't know if I can remember a card as blatantly being designed like scalably, where like this is just okay, and it's so powerful in Commander, but in Commander also there are 4 players, so it's not that powerful. It's like just it reduces its power level so drastically because of the fact that you're playing against 3 other people. I think this card's awesome. I do think that for Modern's purpose, there's always been a fringe legendary deck. Like the Legendary Matters theme has been pushed a few times. There's a lot of good 1-drops that can have you take advantage of what's it called? Mox Amber. The printing of Ragavan was the biggest addition to that idea. And so red white tends to be the focus of that deck with like, the Ragavan and the Isumaru and the Zergo and like those types of cards that you end up playing to kind of be aggressive. And so this being white and coming down on turn 2 and making Ragavan into a 4 power creature with ward is pretty good, right? Like if it's turn 2 and Ragavan's just attacking for 4 with ward 1, there are some players that will just lose to that outright. Period. Done.
That's the thing I'm most excited by. Just like there are more and more powerful 1-drop legendary creatures, and this like gets them so big and protects them so well that it like the problem with Ragavan is that it's so expensive, right? Like, honestly, I think this would like be amazing if Ragavan was like a value card that people would have, because this would be a really cool budget deck, right? But if you're already able to afford Ragavans, that does kind of throw like a ring in the loop. A ring in the loop.
Yeah, I don't know what you're coming up with that one.
I don't either. It tempts you. It's tempting you by buying expensive Ragavans. But yeah, I think like +2/+1 is a lot. is it makes things that are small very big very quickly, and it's not very expensive to do it, and there's enough cards that want to do it, so I can see something happening.
It's legendary. That's
yeah.
its issue. Is that
All right,
you can't
next card, Forge Anew. 2 and a white enchantment. When Forge Anew enters the battlefield, return target equipment card from your graveyard to the battlefield. As long as it's your turn, you may activate equipped abilities anytime you can cast an instant. You may pay 0 rather than pay the equip cost of your first equipped ability you activate during each of your turns. So, right now, the ability to use this on turn 3 to put a Cauldron Complete into play is pretty phenomenal. It has a lot of things that it kind of feels a lot like Greasefang if in the Pioneer decks, right, where they're putting Parhelion into play. The fact that it has redundancy with stuff like Stoneforge Mystic, so it allows you to get Stoneforge Mystic, or this can be used to get those into play. You have good loot effects that you can play with to kind of get them into the graveyard. You have the Goblin that lets you put an artifact from your deck into your graveyard, and then you can use it to put a artifact from your graveyard through your mana less. That's the part that matters less for this. But the fact that you can very easily curve that Goblin into this Cauldron Complete on turn 3 attacking is pretty great. And the fact that, like, on top of that, if they have a blocker, you can attack with the Goblin and Cauldron Complete, and then they have to either block both or they are getting hit because you can move the equipment onto one of the 2 attacking things, either the Germ or that, at instant speed.
Do you think this plays into Hammer decks at all? I mean, obviously,
I think it's okay in Hammer decks. I think the problem with Hammer decks is that they don't really get equipment into their graveyard. Like, you have to be playing a different version of that deck. This to me is much more of like a 3-mana reanimation spell, which we don't have any or very few in Modern, right? I mean, it's specific, but those specific things can be big.
Yeah, I mean, what this allows you to do is it's more copies of what's his name, Pure Steel Paladin, like that effect. It's more of that ability, and it's a non-killable version of that ability that doesn't require Metalcraft. I don't think that deck really needs that. I also think that deck doesn't want to be spending 3 mana to do that. But it is interesting that it's backup. If that deck played 1 of these or 2 of these as just more copies, I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, to me, it's more interesting in a new deck that's like much more of like a Reanimator Stoneblade control deck than what Hammer Time is trying to do.
Because Caldric has 7, so you're getting a real mana savings there.
Right.
Yeah, makes sense.
All right. Next card. This is one of the big cards. This was early on. We've already talked about this on the podcast, but Reprieve. 1 and a white, instant, return target spell to its owner's hand, draw a card. Remand is a white card now.
I believe this card is pronounced Reprieve, just for the listeners on audio that are unfamiliar on episode 400 of my co-host mispronouncing cards. We have talked about this. White Remand. I think we agreed when they first printed this card that it's cool that white has this. Remand is underplayed now. So with the fact that this is in white pushes it. Do you think this is going to have a huge impact? I think you did think so then. Do you still feel pretty hot on it?
Huge impact is a huge statement, right? I think it's going to see decent play, right? I think that like there's a ton of decks that don't have blue in it that want some way to delay effects that enter the battlefield that white do play white that can take advantage of this. You know, there is a lot of things in the format that are not great against a Remand, right? Like anything with Delve, any of the free pitch spells, like all of those are pretty, like getting hit by this is a pretty big beating. And like Remand is still seeing play, right? It's not of the counter spells of a bygone age, a boomer counter spells of all of them. Remand is the one that sees the most play still, right? It's like after counterspell, Force of Negation, and Archmage Charm, the most played counterspell of like the hard counter world is Remand, right? And this is a card that offers an ability to a color that doesn't currently have access to it. Fights off a lot of the things in the format on an axis that is kind of interesting and is just generically good on its own, right? And one of the things I love Remand for, right, back in the day at least, my favorite part of Remand is it's an easy sideboard card. And when I say that, I mean, it's not easy in your sideboard. It's great to have in your main deck because it's good against everyone to some extent. Like there's no opponent that you're like, damn, I wish I didn't have Remand. But there are definitely a lot of matchups where it's like mediocre against it. Yeah. And so it's great as a card to know, like, okay, on game 2, I take my Remands out and I bring in my negates or, not negate, but, my different specific answers to those problems versus this generic one. And I think reprieve
Yes,
is that.
that's a good point. I've had that same experience. I guess my two sides to the thought are like, number one, mana is so good in modern that if you wanted to play blue to have a remand effect, it wouldn't be hard to do in any deck anyway. However, it makes your mana worse, and there is something interesting to be said for the idea that like blue doesn't have good one drops other than Delver, I guess. And blue red decks do because they've got Ragavan and they've got Channeler and stuff. But if you wanted to play a deck that does not play blue, white has way better one drops than blue. If you want to play like a white red aggro deck where everything you're doing is like you're just beefing your board with like 2 power, good things on turn 1, and then you're just like protecting and backing it up. Reprieve is a perfectly fine card to back up a Ragavan with. Like you play it on turn 1, if they don't have the removal, and now you untap and you hold open Reprieve with like burn and backup and stuff like that, that's pretty good. You don't need blue for that, which is interesting. So
yeah, I mean, like right now, Hammer Time is playing Mana Tithe. I can see Hammer Time very much replacing Mana Tithe with this card, right? Like, and it could play blue. It doesn't need to. It would make the deck worse. I think that makes sense. Burn is another. There's random decks that just like will take advantage of this that I think are great, and I think also is a value option too, right? If you can't afford force negations and you're in a white deck, like this is a thing that you could play.
Yeah.
Next card, Shire Sheriff. Say that 30 times fast. 1 and a white creature, halfling soldier, 2/2 vigilance. When Shire Sheriff enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice a token. When you do, exile target creature an opponent controls until Shire Sheriff leaves the battlefield. It is a 1 white 2/2 O-ring on a creature. You just have to have a token in play of some variety before you cast it.
Yeah, it is another soldier, just so we're clear. They're pushing it more and more. Soldiers are very common creature types. It's very good. It doesn't need like the idea. I don't know if you guys do this, but when I look at cards, I always think about like how curving into something. You're not going to curve into this very likely, but the fact that it's going to cost you 2 instead of all of the O-ring, Fiend Hunter type effects later in the game and leave your like mana efficiency up is pretty strong. I think that stands out to me as one of the things about this card that I like probably the most. I do like this card. I think it's quite good.
Yeah, I think it's not good enough for modern. I think it's like close. It's pushed in some ways, but like this requirement is so inflexible and its front side isn't very good that I think it's going to be hard for it to really, really ever do much in the format.
Can I ask a question on the subject of tokens? Because I think this is one you and I were talking about the other day. So, and I think we talked about this on the show last week. So this makes reference to sacrificing a token, a generic token of any kind. And we've seen food tokens have now come back in this set. I don't know how many cards we're going to talk about with food tokens, but it's a major push. And we're going back to Eldraine, which means highly likely more food tokens. Is Academy Manufacturer a card that our audience should be paying attention to, as we're going to wake up one day and everyone's going to look at each other and go, oh, this card's like $50 because it's the linchpin card in this insane new combo because they just printed this new thing. It's so uniquely powerful. And now they're pushing food. So now all 3 of the types have had like significant support.
Yeah, I think like food. I think like everyone in some ways in this set is like looking to see if Tempted by the One Ring is going to break or be overly powerful in the next 3 months, right? In the way that we kind of discussed. And I think secretly it might be some of the food cards. And because food is equally as difficult to like judge how good something is. And so it's hard to say. I going through it, there didn't seem to be anything that was food related in this set right now that was like over the top. The legendary creatures, there are some for sure. But then we're gonna get a lot of food support. And to your point, Academy Manufacturer is like just so bonkers with creating like any of those 3 tokens, and food can so often be under costed because food tokens themselves aren't as powerful as treasures or clues. And then add the layer of Asmore or the cookbook. There's enough food tribal tokens out there, or food token tribal cards out there, that the more food token cards you have, eventually they'll be good enough to see some version of play. So I think there's definitely all of the food cards are worth keeping an eye on to some extent.
My opinion there, the reason I asked specifically was about manufacturer. I would say that to our audience, if you guys have ever liked that card, if you're interested in that card, pick up your set. It's like $3 or less. It's a cheap card. And I do think that there's a real world where that card just skyrockets one day because I think it's so uniquely powerful and there's nothing else like it. And I don't imagine they're going to push that ability harder than that. So that does seem like a relevant thing.
The next card is Eagles of the North, which is a 5 white bird soldier 3/3 flyer. When it enters the battlefield, creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain first strike until end of turn. But the important one, it is one of 5 cards that are all basic land cyclers. So there's plane cycling. Plane cycling. There's one for mountain cycling, forest cycling, swamp cycling, plane cycling, etc. And across the board, they all have varying strong abilities. One of them is food related. Another one gives trample and +2/+0 to a creature when it attacks. This one gives all your creatures. And just anytime there's a 1-mana cycler in any set, Living End decks want to look at it. There's a few of these that are really, really big that like are really beneficial to what you're trying to do. And on top of that, the fact that their basic land cycling allows you to find specific lands you need, right? It does let you find shock lands with their ability.
You said basic land cycling. I was just going to point you out. It's not basic. It's
sorry. It's just regular forest cycling.
Yeah, which is crazy. If you compare this just as frame of reference, Horizons 1, the like flying blue 4/4 for 6, that just had cycling for 1 blue. For a single blue, you could cycle it. This has plane cycling, which is fixing your mana for colorless.
Yeah.
Deceptively good. Rare 2 ability. Does not exist on many cards.
Yeah, I think the blue one is the only one that won't see play because it's draw 3. It's not a creature. It's like draw 3 cards for 6 or something along those lines. But the other ones are all big creatures that are really good with Living End. And I would not be surprised if some amount, if not all of them, see some amount of play in that type of deck.
Yep.
All right, we're going to go to a gold card really quick. We're going Pippin, Guard of the Citadel, white, blue, legendary creature, halfling soldier, vigilance, war, 2/2. Ward 1, it's a 2/2. Tap another target creature you control gains protection from the card type of your choice until end of turn. So this is different than the classic Mother Arune situation because card type does do different things, right? This does affect, like, you can give protection from instants or sorceries or enchantments or planeswalkers or creatures or etc. And like I'm trying to remember what the angel name is. Sarah's Emissary has a similar effect. And if you've ever played with that card, that effect is bonkers. Now, all of your creatures gain protection from a card type of your choice is very different than a Mother of Runes effect, but also 2 mana is a lot different than 7 mana. 2 mana for something with ward is different than that. So I think it definitely has, Pippin definitely has some cool interactions. Sadly, both of its cards, well, Ben has been discussing how soldiers could make it one day, which I don't disagree. They're up there on highest most printed card. There's just not a lot of lords or synergy between them. But halfling is not a human, which definitely hurts this card.
Yeah. I mean, this I do think this card's interesting for like the classic Azorius 2/2 for 2 cool upside hate bear. It's one of the best ones they've ever printed. This one has a lot going for it, I think. We talked about Lavinia, which is on the high end of like ones that don't see play that I think are pretty good. Unsettled Mariner comes to mind from the first Modern Horizons, which is one that I liked a lot. This feels, I think, better overall than any of those. I think chance this gets pushed. I do think it's funny, by the way, just if you guys follow us on TikTok, there's a series I've been doing these like throwbacks looking at old sets. And I just did the one talking about homelands. Do you know the card Apocalypse Chime? Do you know what that is?
No.
It's this artifact for 2 mana. It's a rare, I believe. For 1 and a sacrifice, it is bury all cards from the Homelands expansion. It destroys only cards from that set, which is funny to me because, like, obviously they've settled on this. Like, protect from a card type is like as deep as they're willing to go with weird protections. But I do think it's funny that in the old days there was like throw a card and see where it lands, or like destroy all legends cards or something like that, which is hysterical. So anyway, my aside.
It's almost to the point. I mean, you made the point earlier talking about how Wizards is now designing for multiple formats. I think something that's more interesting is that Wizards is just like more interested in designing cool cards and using powerful abilities in new ways, right? Like This is an effect that has historically been extremely powerful, but now they're putting it on a 2-mana card versus a 1-mana card, but it's 2-mana card with additional upside, and it attacks at a different angle, and I think that's exciting. The next card, the One Ring, 4 mana, legendary artifact, indestructible. When the One Ring enters the battlefield, if you cast it, you gain protection from everything until your next turn. At the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life for each burn encounter on the One Ring. Put a burn encounter on the One Ring, then draw a card for each burn encounter on the One Ring. We did a whole episode talking explicitly about this card, partially due to the One Piece thing that Ben teased it earlier, which is that this is now, if you get the 1 of 1 stamped one, it's worth $1 million minimum, or a million hula hoops. Listeners,
investors, you.
So yeah, for those who don't know, I half jokingly posted on Twitter my bounty on the One Ring. I will give you 1 million hula hoops for the One Ring. So if you get it, let me know. But the playability of this card is, I think we were pretty bullish on it, right? Like the fact that you can use it to lock people out pretty easily. And like if you have 2 of them, the like legendary status of them works really, really well together. The fact that it draws you 2 cards and fogs you for a turn is like really powerful.
Yeah, I think the thing that comes to mind for me when you mention all that is just, even if nothing else happens, if you draw this card and you draw like crap for the next 8 turns, 4 mana, any color, comes down, fogs, draws you a card. You lose a life. By the time it is your turn again, your opponent has passed back to you and skipped their draw step. You get 2 more cards. It's by the time your opponent can interact with you again,
because you lose the life at the beginning of your upkeep.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
So you can play it, tap it, draw a card. If you can get rid of it, you don't lose any life, or you can tap it again during your upkeep to draw 2 more. So it's like lose 1 life, draw 3 cards, and then on your next turn, you can decide to get rid of it or play it a second one to then restart the process.
I guess it's 4 mana, come down, fog. Opponent cannot interact with you. Draw a card, no life loss. Upkeep happens, lose a life for the 1 on it. Your opponent can now interact with you, and then that same turn, tap, put a second counter, draw 2 cards. At that point, you've still only lost 1 life. So now you've fogged, drawn 3, lost 1 life in the course of 2 turns, 2 of your turns, but on the flip side, it's a 4 mana card. Like there are a lot of things in Modern, like just as for frame of reference, like I know this is totally different and way better and scalable, but like Painful Truths doesn't see any play in Modern. Concentrate or Harmonize sees no play in Modern. Like, and I know those are much worse than this, but in terms of like the ability to draw a bunch of cards for 3 or 4 mana has not been placed at a premium in Modern's history. It has to be incidental or cheaper.
I think the thing though is it's not you're playing this you're playing for both halves, right? Like separating either half of that. A 4 mana card that drew you 3 cards, not good enough. A 4 mana card that fogged for a turn with this level of protection, probably not good enough. The ability to do both though, and then if you draw a second one, chain it, and then if you draw the right cards, be able to just do it every single turn, right? Like there's an Academy Ruins and 2 of these, and you just basically like never take damage again, right? You just are indestructible forever, or have protection for everything forever.
There is for sure a combo-centric aspect of what this card offers that I agree. I'm only evaluating it on its base power level. And to be fair, there is the version of this where you go past those 2 turns I just talked about, and you get to the next turn, and now your 4 mana investment has drawn you 6 cards. You've taken 3 life and drawn you 6 cards and fogged for 1 of the turns. And that's pretty good. That's pretty good. 4 mana to draw 6 cards is pretty strong. So it remains to be seen.
Also, just imagine playing this with Shieldred in play.
Yeah. Insane. Complete insanity. So maybe this card's busted. I don't know. It's very good.
I think this card is good. I think it's, you need the deck to be built around it, right? You are playing a ring deck. Yeah. Next card is Press the Enemy. 2 blue instant. Return target spell or non-land permanent an opponent controls to his owner's hand. You may cast an instant or sorcery spell with equal or lesser mana cost from your hand without paying its mana cost. I think to me, the thing that people are mostly talking about this card is that it's an instant speed ability to cast Living End or Crashing Footfalls out of your hand, right? And it's like not a
Yeah.
terrible interaction spell in general in those decks, and it allows you to do the as foretold game plan esque activity. You don't need to have that card in your hand to be able to use it too, right? So you can just use it as a bounce spell or counter spell, but the fact that you can then use it to then cast the thing that is stuck in your hand that wins you the game is powerful.
Yeah, there's the other aspect, which is like
4 mana.
Yeah, it's 4 mana. I was gonna say the other aspect too is like if this is in the like control deck as a one of, and you're holding open 4, and you just like return whatever to their hand, and that allows you to Thought Scour or Opt or Consider or whatever spell you're playing. Like this having cast my Consider out of my hand for free built into it as the mana savings is reasonably tempo-y. I think the lack of playability of Cryptic Command probably means that this is not good in those situations at all. It's probably not like it doesn't quite compete with a Archmage's Charm. So I think probably the only situation this is really playable, given how unplayable Venser's been for so many years, is probably what you're talking about, which is going to be
I don't think this card is playable outside of you trying to cast Crashing Footballs or Living End out of your hand.
Yeah,
right now, being able to counter or return your opponent's spell to their hand and then cast Living End at instant speed is pretty good, though. Like that's like a board wipe that you end up with like 6 power in play. That's a deck that already wants to play with their mana untapped, right? Like because all of your cyclers want you to just start cycling at the end of your opponent's turn. So I do think there's strengths there. The next card is Council's Deliberation. 1 in a blue, instant, draw a card. And then whenever you scry, if you control an island, you may exile Council's Deliberation from your graveyard. If you do, draw a card.
Yes. So this card is really interesting. The only problem with this card is that really at best, it's just 2 mana draw 2. And I think like that's not good enough. Well, 2 mana draw a card. Whenever you scry, if you control an island, you may exile it from your graveyard if you do draw a card. So like what else are you doing with this?
Well, at best you have it in a self-mill Arclight Phoenix instant sorcery spell deck that is more self-mill, and these like the best case scenario is that you discard this or it ends up in your graveyard for free, and then you scry and draw a card, right? Like the
card draw Creeping Chill. It's like that.
Yeah, right. It's draw a card, Creeping Chill, right? That's the best case scenario to me. Medium case scenario is it's 2 mana draw a card, which is not terrible, right? Like that is a if they printed a card to 1 in a blue, draw 2 cards instant, that would be a modern playable card. I think like Expressive Iteration is not too far off of that at sorcery. It's better than that, but it's a sorcery and it costs blue and red, right? So like I think its medium case scenario is draw 2 cards for 2 at instant speed is actually pretty decent. And then if you're playing some weird Arclight Phoenix decks with ops and ways the self-mill, and you're trying to just cast those 3 spells in a turn and you have ways to get them into your graveyard, then it starts becoming like a really bonkers power play.
Yeah, your points really sound there. I guess I sort of forgot about that. There is like...
Then I've never forgotten that there's an option in Magic the Gathering to mill yourself.
And for free. Yeah, the thing about this card that is interesting, I guess, or maybe most interesting, is the fact that like any time ever in Magic's history that there is a way to skirt card draw or mana generation for free, or using your life or graveyard or deck as a resource in some way, it's good. Like from the age-old casting of Land Grant to like Once Upon a Time to Street Wraith the Phyrexian Mana to Creeping Chill to Asmo, like whatever. Anytime you can get something cool for free is good. And you're right. Drawing a card for free is the thing that decks want to do. And the fact that this only costs 2. So yeah, it's fair. It's a fair point.
I think if this card has a home in Modern, Arclight Phoenix is next to it. They're hanging out. They're having a good time. And Phoenix has been good in Modern often. So I think that's not an insane, just like playing this with Faithless Salvaging, right? Like you can use Faithless Salvaging, you discard this, you draw a card, and then you just cast any, Serum Visions, and now you've Serum Visions, you drew a card, scried 2, drew an additional card.
You think that if this had said scry 1, draw 1, and then had the same second ability, it would be too good?
Do I think it would be better if it said that?
Well, no, like obviously it would be better, but my point is like, do you think that if the front side was scry 1, draw 1, so the back side was next time you draw Council's Deliberation, you're going to be able to draw the other one for free? Like, do you think that would be too good?
Yes.
Okay, fair enough.
I think it removes the work, right? I think this card is very, very powerful, but it takes work. That work might not be too hard to do. I mean, the kind of my point is like a deck that's playing Ledger Shredder, Arclight Phoenix, and Serum Visions already kind of like one thing that it would be interesting is like it does have a weird relationship with Opt versus Consider.
Yeah.
Right. That's the big thing is it doesn't trigger off of Surveil. It only triggers off of Scry. And so that in some ways is its biggest negative. If it said Scry and Surveil, I think it becomes like very good now because it's just Scry. It's decent. But I also think like there's ways to add additional incidental Scry to a deck that this deck could take advantage of that maybe it's not. But
does that also make Serum Visions more of an option than it has been for a while if this card became good?
I mean, the Arclight Phoenix deck I'm looking at is playing Serum Visions, right? So it's not seeing play in those decks.
I got it. Okay.
It's Serum Visions. It's still like a house, right? Like that hasn't lost its luster entirely. But I think it would maybe like lose not Lightning Axe because you need the discard something in here that like would maybe help. But sure. It's an interesting. There's maybe a conversation that maybe Consider becomes Opt again. Like you lose the ability to just like mill your Phoenix, but you get this as a trigger. I don't know.
Sure.
The next card, and I think this is one of the better cards in the set, Stern Scolding. 1 blue, Fool of a Took. Instant, counter target creature spell with power or toughness 2 or less. At one point I looked it up, like it's like over 60% of all of the most played creatures in Modern are countered by this, including Solitude, including Ragavan, including that even takes like basically I think every single card out of the Yawgmoth deck gets countered by this because Yawgmoth itself is a 2/4. So like there's a lot of like because it's power and toughness and not CMC, there's a lot of things that it's just out of the gate gets rid of. Now it is in essence scatter variant, which like classically not the best thing in Modern, but the fact that it hits so much of the format is pretty and the format has 4 of its key removal spells are technically creatures, definitely makes it exciting to me.
It'll be interesting to see. I mean, the thing that's fascinating about Modern is that there are so many options now. The decks have become very refined based on the meta. So I think given the right meta, which maybe is this meta, this card will be good. If you think about other cards over the years that have been very good, that have cost 1, let's take Spell Snare as a good example of a card that for Modern's first half was like pretty good and playable in most of the blue decks.
Right.
There's just way better options now. You don't play Spell Snare anymore. You don't really need to. In certain formats, it'll be a one of, but like
I think part of Spell Snare not seeing plays because 2-drops are not good in Modern right now. Like they're either all 1-drops or like 6 free, like free 4-drops, right? Like the 2-drop space is weird versus like this counters Ragavan, this counters Seasoned Pyromancer, it counters Brazen Borrower, Dragon Rage Channeler, Ledger Shredder, Grief, Shardless Agent, which is fine, Haywire Might. You know, like there's so many weird Dwathi Voidwalker, Esper Sentinel, Solitude, basically everything out of like I don't think there's a single creature in Hammer Time or the Yawgmoth deck that doesn't get countered by this spell, right? Like it hits so many things so like easily that it becomes really exciting.
Yeah, I think this card's really good. I think this is arguably one of the best cards in the set. I think my point is your comment about Essence Scatter is correct. And I think that even beyond that, when a thing is good because it's specific, it's good because it's the best version in a certain meta. So I think maybe this meta is the one, just depending on how Modern, further develops. We'll see.
And we kind of said it with Reprieve, right? Like there's always a conversation amongst all the different counter spells you can play. Which one should you play?
Right.
And this one now is a part of that conversation. Yeah. Birthday Escape, 1 in blue, sorcery, draw a card. The ring tempts you.
Of course it does. Thank you, Bilbo.
He doesn't want to be at the birthday. He's gotta get out of there and hang out with the ring. Here's the deal with this card. Cantrips are always interesting.
Yeah.
The rings escaping do let you loot. So in some ways, this could be 1 mana, draw a card, discard a card, which is obviously very good if you have a creature that can attack. It kind of gives a creature unblockable, so it's kind of 1 mana, draw a card, target creature gains unblockable. I don't think anything but the first 2 abilities on the ring tempts you are things you should count on as a part of a strategy, unless you're really going after the ring tempts you. But I think those 2 abilities with draw a card attached out of like an infect deck is not uninteresting, because of the ability, the first ability on the ring tempting you, which I need to remind myself the exact wording to make sure I'm not saying that wrong, and how that interacts with infect, because that's the place I think this is interesting. Your ring bearer can't be blocked by creatures with greater power. So you can get to, if you cast this in infect, if you cast this on your Glistener Elf, attack with Glistener Elf, get to the post declare blocker step, so they couldn't block it. You can then pump and kill your opponent, right? And it helps you draw into that, which is not the worst thing. And the second one you cast lets you start looting to sculpt your hand better. So
also, you mentioned this already, cantrips always being interesting. One thing that's fascinating, if you guys have never done this, I recommend you do it. Look on any database, just draw a card. Look it up at 1 CMC in every color. 1 or 0, but I mean, it's rarely anything else. There are a few things you won't find, like the street wraiths of the world, that don't qualify. But if you just look things up that cost 1, you'll realize the shockingly low number of 1-drops that actually draw cards that don't require you to target. It's a lot of 1-drops that make you target creature gets first strike till end of turn, draw a card. Target creature becomes blue till end of turn, draw a card. If you don't have a creature on turn 1, you can't play those cards. The number of cantrips for 1 mana that just outright draw a card, they're much lower than you think. And if you're talking about that with the upside of these 4 abilities, getting started on turn 1 because you don't need a creature, You can play this on turn 1 without a creature. Once you have a creature, it becomes your ring bearer, but you begin your ring bearer without a creature.
Right.
I don't think this card is modern playable, but there's something we don't understand about this yet that could fool us later on.
The more I think about it, the more I think it is like, cast this on Ragavan.
Like turn 1 Ragavan, turn 2 Birthday Escape, and now Ragavan can't be blocked by
anything that is like anything that's a 3 power or bigger can't block Ragavan. It's just like, and you drew a card to replace it, and blah 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 blah. Right? Like
the third ability makes Ragavan essentially have Death Touch. And the fourth ability,
then anything that could block Ragavan just dies if they do block it. So Ragavan becomes a little bit of just a removal spell. And then the fourth ability is it starts dealing 5 damage a turn.
Ragavan, sorry, ring tempts you. Can you clarify for me really quickly? Is it dealt damage or attacked or blocked?
Each ability is so the draw card is attacks. The drain life is deals damage.
What about the third ability? Is it
the
dealt damage?
Whenever a ring bearer becomes blocked by a creature, that creature's controller sacrifices it at the end of combat.
Okay, so here's where things just got really interesting, because I was wondering this. You can dash Ragavan if you have some ability to return it to your hand, and once it's got the ability, if they want to block it, you can bounce it back to your hand as long as you had any bounce ability, any kind of repeatable bounce.
The problem is you would have to dash Ragavan, then cast Birthday Escape on like you'd have to give him the ring bearer status. Something has to.
Well, no, agreed. I'm sort of saying that like mid game, if you've cost Ragavan on turn 1, or turn 2 Birthday Escape happens, and now your deck's got any number of the things that can allow you to bounce things back to your hand for any kind of benefit, additional cost, return a creature to your hand type of effects. The fact that it only has to be blocked by for them to sacrifice the creature, and you can dash Ragavan the next turn, so it has haste the next turn, and it's the same Ragavan with the same ring ability. You don't have to reassign it. It's just a dash Ragavan that's going to loot and can't be blocked and kills things and deals additional damage. Yeah, I mean, I'm curious to see how the ring tempts you thing plays out, but Birthday Escape is certainly one of the most interesting 1-drop cantrips I've ever seen. It's much better than most of them.
Yeah. 1 mana, draw a card, get that is a very versatile list of words that, and to your point, like there's not a lot of cards that let you just draw a card. I think there's a lot of value here. That's a little bit more deceptive than you would think. One thing to also just go back to Council's Liberation, because I was thinking about this with the card we were just talking about, but Dragon Rage Channeler exists too. Just like surveilling it into your graveyard, like having things that they can surveil is good. Next card, and this is going back to gold. We're going to gold really quick before we get to the swamp mana. Saren's Ransom, 1 blue, black, instant. Choose an opponent. They look at the top 4 cards of your library and separate them into a face down pile and a face up pile. Put 1 pile into your hand and the other hand in your graveyard. The ring tempts you. So basically, Fact or Fiction. It's 3 mana, but it costs the black. In Modern, that doesn't matter. And then you get 4 cards versus 5 cards, and one of those piles is face down. So you don't get to see it, but 3 mana is a lot less than 4 mana.
Sure, yeah.
And that's the big, because Fact or Fiction is in Modern, right? It was added, I believe, in Modern Horizons 2. But getting to be able to do it for 3 is a lot less than 4. And I don't know how much one of the piles being face down really matters to you. It's always 3 mana for 2 draw.
I was just gonna say you're trading the ability for 4 mana at instant speed to draw you 3, because there'll always be 3 with Fact or Fiction, for 3 to draw you 2, and you're trading a mana for a card in that situation. But the second pile in Fact or Fiction is always gonna be 2 anyway, so it's essentially 3 for what is usually going to be made to be your worst pile, like or your better pile, whatever. The one you'll take they'll usually make it appealing for you to take the 2, is the kind of the deal with Fact or Fiction. So it's 3 for 2, right? Is the kind of the idea. You just don't know which. I don't know. I guess my point on this is like the ring tempting me is like, this doesn't feel like the kind of card I'd want to play in a deck that wants to take advantage of the ring tempting.
If I cast this spell and I put a face down card in front of you and a face up pile with 3 cards in it, what are you choosing?
A face. Oh, it's not 2 and 2. It's just 2 piles. So you can give me a 3 and 1. If there's a card you specifically do not want me to get. The card that I want.
You don't know what the 1 is. I could give you like Lightning Bolt, land, like second Ragavan, and then the other card is face down.
Yeah, I mean there's okay. Design, bravo. Very fun. This is really cool and done very well. And I guess I did change my thought there for a second. Like, it is, because it costs 3, a little more applicable to a deck that's going to play one of those like done bad 1-drops I like playing. So like ring tempting me like fits into the Delver vibe, whatever that vibe is. But I still think this card's probably not good enough. But it's interesting. But it's definitely interesting.
I think it's close, and I think it's gonna, like, I love this effect, and we'll talk about another card in a second that's similar. I'm here for Fact or Fiction style games at all times. Next card, right, an artifact. So that was the last of the blue cards, I believe. Next, we're going to artifact land. It's Wizard's Rockets. 1 for Wizard's Rockets enters tapped. You may tap and sacrifice it to add X mana. X tap, sacrifice Wizard's Rockets, add X mana in any combination of colors. And then when Wizard's Rocket is put into your graveyard from the battlefield, draw a card. So if you untap it is 1 mana, draw a card on an artifact the next turn. Yeah. Which is worse than Mishra's Bauble.
We can talk for a brief second about the flavor on this card, I think. Only because I think this is such a memorable, like, fun scene from Lord of the Rings, right? Like, it is like Gandalf bringing all the fireworks.
Then I don't care about flavor or story at all in Magic the Gathering. I don't want to talk about. Our viewers wouldn't want to listen to that either. Who would?
I want to play this card and just look at my opponent just like dead in the face and be like, a wizard is never early or late. He always arrives exactly when he intends to. Like,
I do wish this card just like didn't. I understand. I wish this card didn't enter the battlefield tapped. Is I think the big thing.
Feels unnecessary to me.
Yeah, because I guess that would just be better than what's the Tron plays it 1 mana, 1 sack it, make a mana, draw a card. Star,
Chromatic Star.
Yeah, Chromatic Star. It would just make it better than Chromatic Star.
It comes down for 1, sacrifices for 1, gets you 1 mana of any color, and draws you a card.
So this is literally that card, but it enters the battlefield tapped, and the 1 mana you spend to get 1 mana is scalable to be X equals X, right?
Yeah, but they make cards that are strictly better all the time. There's just I don't know how. I mean, it could have been like, could have entered untapped, right from the battlefield, draw a card. It could have been like goes to the battlefield, exile it or something. Exile Wizard's Rocket, draw a card.
I think we're moving on because we have a lot of cards to get through, and there are better ones. Orcish Bowmasters, 1 in a black creature, Orc Archer, 1/1 flash. When Orcish Bowmaster enters the battlefield, and whenever an opponent draws a card except the first one they draw in each of their draw steps, Orcish Bowmaster deals 1 damage to any target, then amass 1 orc. So this is being heralded as one of the best cards in the set. This is everyone from Modern to CDH is talking about this card being a massive blowout. I personally think it's overrated. Ben, what are your thoughts on Orcish Bowmaster?
I saw you saying on Twitter that you thought it was overrated. So can I just start with CDH? The things that are drawing you lots of cards in CDH that state draw a card. Because correct me if I'm wrong, does Adnaz put it into your hand or draw a card?
Does not. Adnaz puts it into your hand.
Okay, that's what I thought. So this does not help with Adnaz. This doesn't help with Necropotence either for the same format because Necropotence exiles and puts it into your hand. So what are the cards in CDH that draw you tons of cards that people are worried about? And this can help. Sure. Okay. And because it's not one that turn, it's just permanent. It just sits in play.
I think people are overrating it a little bit because it doesn't say the first time on a turn or once a turn, right? It doesn't have that rider on it. And so now people are overrating that ability. Also, I think amass is not getting amassing an orc is not getting a 1/1 elemental, right? No. That just becomes a bigger and bigger creature. And Bitter Blossom is a better card than the amass zombie version of Bitter Blossom they printed.
Dreadhorde Invasion. People forget how mediocre amass actually was in War of the Spark relative to Bitter Blossom. It was not very good. That card's not that good.
And so with that in mind, but it is also dealing a damage to any target, right? So it can kill things. It also is a flash back into Modern, which we're doing the Modern set review of Lord of the Rings. It does worst case scenario on if you're on the play, it does just kill. It is just 2 mana kill Ragavan, right? Don't worry about them drawing an extra card. Just flash, block, kill it. And then if you can do anything better than that, it's way better than that. There are a lot of X1s in the format. There's not as many as you would think because Ren and 6 is just eaten every X1 out of the format.
Yeah, true.
Including probably this card. The fact that you do get to get them, right? If they play any way of there are a lot of ways that people draw cards in Modern, and this does gain some amount of value no matter what. You will always have 2 creatures in play for that. I just think it's a little. I think it's overrated. I think a mass is worse than a 1/1. Doing 1 damage to anything in Modern is not as good as it used to be, and I think it'll see play, but I don't think it'll be I don't think it's the staple people are expecting.
It's also not a relevant creature type or card type. It's just a flash 1/1 for 2, which to me is the amass is fairly irrelevant. It's fair that your amass orcs 1 over the course of a game in a bigger format can get big, but in Modern, you're talking about a 1/1 growing to a 3/3 or 4/4 over a few turns, maybe. So that's not that relevant. The damage is pretty good. I mean, that does change your opponent's habits, and the upside here is that this doesn't cost you very much. And you probably have gotten upside because it costs flash. It has flash, but I would say there's a pushed version of this card, a la Ragavan, the Ragavan formula of there's a pushed version of this card that's a 2/1 or is a zombie or is make a 1/1 or one of those things is changed to make this generally good.
Is a goblin, right? It has a good creature type.
Each of those things is not the case, which means that this is just a card that's going to fit into a black deck. Now, I would say if this gets overrated, gets printed, 3 months pass, it drops down because it's a rare, not a mythic, to $2, $1, and it's out there, and people are oh, it was overrated. Pick up 10 of them because guaranteed in a couple years, unless they errata this card to not say Orcs 1, it's probably a card that will not get reprinted for a while because it's more specific to the set. And I do think this is going to be good. I think this is a good card. I think this card, like specifically in modern and formats like that, will be, oh yeah, I mean, that combo that's killing everyone, just put Orcish Bowmasters into your deck. Like, just put 4 of them into your sideboard, and like they can't win because if you just play this in response, they just lose. That's totally a thing that this card's going to be. I think there's no question. It's 1 damage to any target, which like is pretty powerful. You can board sweep, you can just ruin them. If you have some ability to make everybody draw cards, like if you have some ability that's like all players draw 20, you just kill someone. If that happens, it's also, you can be the one that creates that. If you play this alongside Fairy Mastermind from March of Machine, every time you activate it and you both draw a card, you draw another card for them and also deal 1 to them and amass. Like, that's pretty good. There are things this card's very good with, but I don't think this isn't Ragavan. I'm not looking at this and going, this is just obviously the best card in the set.
Yeah. I agree with you. Yeah, yeah. I've said what I'm going to say. Next card. I guess what I'll say, I would rather play Dark Confidant, and I don't think I want to be playing Dark Confidant in Modern right now at all. Golem Scheming Guide. 1 black, legendary creature, halfling horror. When Golem Scheming Guide attacks, look at the top 2 cards of your library, put them back in any order, then choose land or non-land. An opponent guesses whether the top card of your library is the chosen kind. Reveal that card. If they guessed right, remove Golem from combat. Otherwise, you draw a card and Golem can't be blocked this turn.
There's going to be a series of videos that will exist probably sometime in the next year where you and I play against each other with this card. And it's just going to be a video of guessing and just the angry reaction to being wrong and getting disrupted by it.
Kind of desperately want to make like Golem, Sauron's Ransom, and like Gifts Ungiven and Factor Fiction, just like a deck playing all of those cards.
Yeah.
And just exist purely to play mind games with you or my opponents, and just consistently get you, that's what I'm looking for. I think that like I would rather play this than Dark Confidant if Dark Confidant was our scale, right? So I would rather play this Golem than Orcish Bowmasters, possibly. That might be a really hot take, but the fact that it like has the potential to have an unblockable 2/1 and draw a card every other turn seems like pretty fine. I don't think it's good enough for Modern, but I don't think any of these cards are good enough for Modern. The fact that it doesn't have Flash, like Flash definitely helps Bowmasters, so I guess I'd play Bowmasters. This card's really fun, though.
The issue with this card is that there's a world in which you play it on turn 2. It's legendary, so you're probably not going to play more than 1 or 2 in a deck. It doesn't have a creature type of relevance, unfortunately. It's not a goblin or an orc, which makes sense. It's Golem. Orcs aren't relevant anyway. Horror kind of is. Hidden horror, anyone? Okay, here we go. But it is not relevant in that way, which means there is a world in which you just attack on turn 3 and attack on turn 4, and they just guess correctly. And this is just a nerf. Dude does nothing.
Yep.
That makes this card, unfortunately, kind of irrelevant.
Yep.
On the other hand, there's the version of this card where you attack on turn 3 and turn 4 with an unblockable 2/1 that draws you a card each turn. It also rearranges the top 2 cards of your library, which that sounds like a sign me up deal right there, boss. So I guess that's the tension and why this card's fun. It's just, I think it's a little bit.
I wish it was pushed more, because I think this card is massively fun, but not good enough. Like I wish it was like a 4/1.
What if the legendary deck's Mardu, and you're playing this alongside like the Ragavan and the Mox Amber and all those cards we talked about?
Just like a legendary, because it's a legendary 2/1 that you want a legendary 2 drop, and there's not that many good legendary 2. I think I'd just rather have Thalia or something, though. Yeah, I think that's, yeah. Next card is Haunt of the Dead Marches. Black Nightmare Elf for a 1/1. When Haunt of the Dead Marches enters battlefield, scry 1. 2 and a black, return Haunt of the Dead Marches from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Activate only if you control legendary creature. The relevance is the card type. This is an elf. It's a 1-mana elf, 1/1 that helps filtering in the elf decks that may be something they relevantly would like, while also offering like a late game consistent, you will have an elf in play if you need it for your Elvish Archdruids or whatever. I think it's too black intensive, but otherwise interesting.
Yeah, I think it's too black intensive and too slow. I do know those decks generate a lot of mana, So there is that. They generate a lot of green mana traditionally, which is not my favorite thing for the use of this card. The
Yeah,
like
I
when
think this to me this card is interesting if I was playing elves more because it late game lets me flatten my draws out better. Like it makes sure I can scry into stuff that I want. But I agree with you. I think it's just too like if it didn't enter the battlefield like there's like something missing on it to make it relevant for modern.
there's the version of like when an elf comes into play, draw a card types of effects that this like late game means you can pay 3 to put it into play and draw a card. That is cool, but I think it's underpowered. So we can move on.
Next card is Mirkwood Bats, 3 and a black creature bat flying. Whenever you create or sacrifice a token, each opponent loses 1 life, 2/3. This is the card everyone, and now obviously I think the reaction to this has been Commander. This is like the card that everyone's like, this is one of the most powerful cards in this set. Actually, in any format, I think 4 mana is way too much for that. It does like there are ways you just win because it's both when you make and or sack. So like if you just can get a lot of treasures into play.
Yeah, this card alongside the whole John Johnson Chaos Crafter archetype is a win condition.
Yep.
Right. So there is that. But I think if you compare this to Blood Artist and Falconwrath Noble, like those cards, there's plenty of ways to make creatures and sacrifice them. Like that's a thing people do and have done. I know treasure tokens very specifically are free to sacrifice. That's a thing. Like that's the biggest reason this is a thing here. You can make a treasure and you can sacrifice it. And it's when you make the treasure and sacrifice the treasure, everybody loses too. But I still think making that many treasures, there's only one card, only one ring that is that efficient at doing that thing. And let's be honest, every deck is made insane by Dockside Extortionist. You don't need Mirkwood Bats for Dockside Extortionist to win the game. Like every deck I put it in is just like insane when I play it. So
yeah, like it's kind of a conversation. Like the moment that this is good, you're already winning.
Yeah,
and yeah, I agree. Next card is Stone of Eric. 1 legendary artifact. If a creature an opponent controls will die, exile it instead. You may pay 2 and tap it to exile target player's graveyard, draw a card. This is another in a long list of cards that just, I get it. Wizards hates a graveyard and they want to get rid of them. I think this was an interesting one because the front end has like a rest in peace-esque static effect. It only affects dead creatures, so it's not as good against something like Dredge, but it's pretty great and like a pretty powerful sideboard card. And the fact that it is your opponent's only is really versatile. And then obviously it has the backup nuclear option of exiling their entire graveyard and then getting the draw card from it.
Yeah, I mean, over the last few years, there's been a real focus on Wizards printing 1-mana artifacts that have like effects like this. Now, this one, the front end static ability on this is actually really different than a lot of what we get. We often get the like 1 mana activates for 1 mana variant of a Relic of Progenitus, Scrabbling Claws deal. There's like 4 or 5 of them now, to the point that they're, there's like Jack-O-Lantern, I think, is one they printed a few years ago. That's like kind of another one. And they're fine. Those are abilities that are like good to have if you need to play multiples of them. In Modern, you're only going to play the best ones. So is this better than the best ones? And like I think you mentioned it, but Rest in Peace meets Relic of Progenitus, kind of Grafdigger's Cage type of vibes. I think this is powerful enough that it's in ballpark with it. Doesn't matter that it's legendary because you only need one in play at a time anyway, so who cares? It sacrifices for 2. That's my biggest concern. If the sacrifice for 1, I think it would be more on my radar. The fact that it sacrifices for 2 just means you have to leave mana open throughout the game to activate this, and like it's kind of tough. So
yeah, I think like if I'm a deck who would want Rest in Peace, other than the fact that my graveyard is important, this is a type of card I'd be looking at, right? Where it's like this keeps their creatures when they die from entering the graveyard, which is really good. Like this is a great sideboard card against Yawgmoth decks. And if I'm not able to play Dwathi, if I'm not in black, right? Like this is a great option when I can't play Dwathi Voidwalker. This is a great option if I want my graveyard to exist. Like I'm playing like specifically I'm playing Murktide. If I'm playing Murktide, like I don't want to eat my graveyard with a Relic of Progenitus because I need my graveyard for delve purposes. This is a great option to me, right? This is better than Relic because Relic eats my own graveyard. I can't play any of the black or white options. This still does draw a card, and there are a lot more opportunities in that style of deck where I have my mana open because I have counter magic open and they didn't cast a spell, and I have the opportunity to do this. And or if they do cast a spell, it's a spell that this counters their spell better than my counterspell, right? Like that, if I have a choice between counterspell and this, and you're casting Living End, I choose Stony of Eric and just like, okay, you can have nothing in your graveyard, and I now have exiled your graveyard. So
yeah, your point is that the upside of the front end is balanced by the high cost of the backside.
Yeah,
it's they essentially balance each other.
And like the fact that it doesn't affect your own graveyard, right? Like those are the two pieces that are interesting to me, where like some of the alternative options are either color specific, right? Like if you don't play black in your deck, then this replaces a lot of the better options that are out there for you. Next card, we're in red. Spiteful Banditry. X red enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, it deals X damage to each creature. Whenever one or more creatures your opponents control die, you create a treasure token. Sadly, this ability triggers only once each turn.
It's not parallel to Meathook because of that last little clause you put on there. It's like the red version of Meathook that's kind of bad.
Well, I would say that making a treasure in multiplayer, I think making a treasure on each of my opponent's turns and my turn is comparable to the drain effect on Meathook Massacre, especially in a 40 life format where life matters way less than making a ton of mana, right? So I think in that format, it's better. I think Meathook Massacre doesn't see tons of play in Modern. Modern is also a format where colors do matter. Like this matter. Like if you can't play black, you might want this as a red board wipe. It's not like there's a large library of good red board wipes. I don't think this is good enough for Modern. But mostly because I think it's like, I don't think it is worse than Meathook Massacre or much worse, but I don't think it's good enough for Modern.
To me, it strikes me as a card that's going to be good and is going to, you pick them up because I think that card's going to go up in price because I think like Meathook is expensive and there's a reason. I think that card is really good. I don't think Modern is going to see enough of creatures die over enough turns that upside's worth it. And I think that the downside is that if like Anger of the Gods or effects like that for 3 get you 3 damage, this has 5 to get 3 damage, which is way worse. It's just a lot worse. So I can't see a world in which this card is playable. However, the next card, definitely playable. This card's insane.
Moria Marauder, red, Goblin Warrior, double strike. When a goblin or orc you control deals combat damage to a player, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn, 1/1.
I mean, so for years and years and years and years, the question was always Goblin Lackey, right? Can Lackey get printed into Modern? That was always the question because Lackey was the one drop that, if I remember correctly, Lackey was like a 1/1 for 1 that when it dealt damage, you could put a goblin from your hand into play, right? Combat damage. That's how it worked. So that was always like the missing link for what would have made goblins insane.
And there's the goblin
Warren Instigator.
Instigator, which is which is relevant to this card because it's a red 1/1 double strike. Whenever you do damage to a player, you get to put a goblin into play. This is also a red 1/1 double strike.
Yeah, Warren Instigator, classically too slow. Good card, just never like got the velocity going. By turn 3, getting a couple goblins into play, your opponent could interact, they could kill it. Didn't do enough. This does not require your hand to be full of goblins. This does not require that at all. It's just a 2 mana 1/1 double striking goblin that is going to allow you to exile cards. Now, it's only play that card this turn. I want to make that clear. It's different templated from a lot of the blue-red effects, which is until the end of your next turn you can play that card. That is a difference. So on turn 3, if you've got a thing in your hand that you want to cast, like it's essential to your game plan, and you flip 2 2-drops or something, you're probably going to miss out on one or both of the cards you're flipping. And it is play though. It's not cast. So you can play a land, you exile a land on turn 3. So I don't know if this makes goblins like a tier 1 playable deck, but it sure makes it closer. They keep giving us more and more fodder.
So I have a weird thoughts on this card. One, your point with Warren Instigator was slow. This has a slowness to it. If it does eventually get attacked, it gets to do 2 hits. You get to exile 2 cards. It's a lord. So if you, whatever your 1-drop is, or whatever hasty goblins you play out afterwards, also get the trigger exiling cards, which is much more powerful than what Warren Instigator is doing. On the other hand, it's not optional. So in the deck now in Goblins, often the decks are like Skirt, Prospector, Snoop combo decks. And I can see a lot of games where you're like on the beatdown game plan at first, and you have Moria Marauder, and based on the order of how you have to exile things because of how many goblins you dealt damage, you accidentally exile the combo out from being able to be castable or even like doable, right? And so you can't like stack it correctly. So I almost want to say I think this card is a miss. I think like it or it's playing the deck that I think wants this more. Like I don't think the Snoop decks want it. I think the 8-whack decks want it though. I think the like I'm playing. But the problem with the 8-whack decks on the other side, not to like, is that those don't want to be playing stuff in your second main phase. Like everything that deck wants to be doing is like playing your goblins with kicker on first main phase so that they all trigger because they're all like ETB, your combat step gets bigger. And so I think like in some ways, Moria Marauder just doesn't line up with the current 2 main goblin strategies in the format. That being said, to your point, right now Goblins isn't a tier 1 deck in Modern. Because maybe those 2 strategies aren't the strategies you should be doing, and this maybe is more of a value-oriented Gomblo aggro deck. That seems like Fury eats this thing for lunch.
On the note of Fury, I will say the thing about this card that stands out to me that's the strongest, there is an aggro goblins deck. It's a good deck. There's a lot of good cards in that deck. There's a version of that deck where this flips a Fury, and unless I'm mistaken, you can evoke Fury from exile, which means you can play that card this turn. That card has an evoke casting
I think
cost.
You can. Debatable.
I'm pretty sure.
I'm not here to confirm to deny. I'm hoping Rick has put confirm or denied on top of our heads.
I'm happy to be wrong.
Alternative casting costs are weird, but yes, I think you are correct.
Which my brain does equate to, because this is not legendary and you can flip a Fury. There's a part of me that's like, can this just curve out and you like flip Fury as one of your 2 cards on the double strike, where it's like, okay, flip Fury, exile card from hand, replace that exiled card with the other card that I can now play, the lightning bolt, I don't know, whatever. There's just a part of me that imagines Fury being so good, and if you're getting free Furies on attack triggers,
I don't think. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how good Fury is in either of those decks, and with 8-whack, or like the point of that deck is the cost like under $50 to buy in on the whole deck, and playing Furies doesn't seem to really go with that mode. But
sure.
So maybe Fury could be good in that deck. But that deck, if you can afford the Furies, you should be affording a better deck than 8-whack. And I don't know if this card puts it over the top. The next card is Gloin Dwarf Emissary. 2 red, legendary creature, Dwarf Advisor. Whenever you cast a historic spell, create a treasure token. This ability triggers only once each turn. Sacrifice a treasure token, goad target creature. I think the thing that hurts this card is the only once each turn rider.
Yep. I mean, it's just a 3-mana 3/3 that allows you to get a treasure off of.
Yep.
I mean, it certainly has like acceleration potential, but at 3 CMC, it's just not doing enough.
Yeah. I think if it's a classic case of Wizards stop putting this ability triggers only once each turn on cards. It always is a bad time. The next card, Delighted Halfling. Green Halfling Citizen. Tap, add a colorless, or tap, add 1 mana of any color. Spend this mana only to cast a legendary spell, and that spell can't be countered. It's a 1/2. I think this is the best card in the set. I think the 1 mana 1/2 tap for a thing, the fact that it's a 1/2 is already just like leagues ahead of other options currently that are playing. And then the fact that it makes legendary spells uncounterable is its own version of bonkers.
Yeah, this card's nuts. Big like congratulations, round of applause for Wizards making this a rare, not a mythic. From the perspective of like how good this is obviously going to be, and how sought after this card is going to be, and how sought after this card is going to be for lots of formats. I think this card's going to be good in Modern. I think you'll be able to make this card work in Modern, but I think also obviously in Commander this card's going to be good, and it's going to be just a delightful, no pun intended, card for like most casual players. It's easy to understand and very fun to play, and I'm glad this is not a mythic, because if this was a mythic in this set, this card would get insane really fast. And then they would have to find a way to reprint a card called Halfling, which is not that easy for them to do. So I'm glad it's a rare. People will open a lot of these when they're digging for the One Ring. And there will be a lot of them out there, which is great. And I think this card's terrific. I'm excited for it.
Yep. I mean, the amount of Birds of Paradise variants and Llanowar Elf variants that have been printed in the history of Magic that haven't been pretty decent is real small. And then just add any up, like literally just 1 green, 1/1 taps for a colorless has seen significant tournament play in formats. And then just the more you add on top of it, the more likely it is to see play. And I think this hits all of the things. And the 1/2 status is not to be like the fact that it dodges Fury, or dodges just being blown out by Fury, and dodges Renin 6 is like a not to be understated. Dodges Gut Shot, like it being a 1/2 is actually like a very legitimate big deal. And I just remember Deathrite Shaman being so frustrating because it was a 1/2, and all the ways that were good in the decks that Deathrite Shaman was so good against, the best removal they had available were -1/-1, or 1 damage, and just like, why is it a 1/2? Delighted Halfling falls into that same variety.
Shock, man. People are gonna start playing Shock. You watch.
Next card, Elven Farsight, green for a sorcery, scry 3. Then you may reveal the top card of your library. If it's a creature card, draw a card.
Yeah, I think this is just good. I think it's good in any creature deck that like ever has wanted to dig. I think it's pretty good, right? Like, hard to imagine.
It's like kind of better than if you were playing 50% creatures in your deck.
Yeah.
This is better than Ponder.
If you're playing 50% creatures in your deck, this is going to see at 3 cards 20% of your deck. So, or
like with Ponder, you look at the top 3 and then you decide you shuffle to draw, right? That's like your loose case scenario, and then whatever you draw is you don't want. In this, it's you scry 3 and none of them are creatures, so you don't get to draw a card, but you do still get to scry 3, right? So you do get to like say like, oh, it's turn 5. I have 5 lands in play, and the top 3 cards of my deck are lands. If you bottom, and then reveal the top card, and it's an Elven Farsight or another land, at least then you're not in a pocket of 4 lands deep that you're driving through, right? So I think like it feels comparable to Ponder to me, in a deck that is leaning heavily into creatures. And then the fact that most decks that are leaning heavily to creatures are often in some way kind of trying to be combo, right? Like if you're playing Yawgmoth, or if you're playing elves, the fact that this like lets you find the specific thing you need is also very nice. Yeah, I think this card's really good.
My comment of 20% of your deck is incorrect. It sees 5% of your deck is it's the actual math of 3 out of 60.
Yeah.
Solid. But no, I think that the point is that scry 3 for 1 green, when it has the high upside of getting to draw a card, even in the instances that you miss, where you hit like triple land, there's a scenario where you have a decent hand and triple land is going to just outright lose you the game, where this is going to stop you from losing. Like, Scry 3 is pretty good. Scry 3 is not like to be trifled with. I think we all forget sometimes. I think
people are going to underrate this card because they're going to see Scry 3 and then you only draw a card with a creature without realizing that you still get the Scry 3. That ability doesn't go away. You just don't necessarily get to draw the extra card.
If you've ever played like a game of limited, you keep like a 2-lander, you hope you hit your third color, and then you just don't hit a land for 3 turns, and you just 100% lose the game. This is your insurance, right? To that type of scenario.
Next card is Barad-dûr. We're in the land. Legendary land. Barad-dûr enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a legendary creature. Tap black or tap XX black. Tap amass Orcs X. Activate only if a creature died this turn.
Yeah. I guess it's no, I don't think this card's good enough for Modern.
I think that the untapped land cycle, which is really what we're talking about, because the next one is Minas Tirith, which is same deal. If you have a legendary creature, it enters untapped. It taps for white mana, but it's 1 and a white, tap, draw a card, activate only if you attacked with 2 or more creatures this turn. I think this is the best of the cycle. Sure. Minas Tirith specifically. I think this cycle is like very good in general. Untapped lands that do things can be very powerful.
Sure, upside.
The writer of needing legendary creature is not as free as, say, Monano, which is actually free, but the abilities on a lot of them are better. I think if I'm ranking them right now, I would have Minas Tirith at the top, probably the Shire next, which just lets you create a food token by tapping a creature. Okay. Probably like Mines of Moria in the decks that want it, or Rivendell, but I think after those two, I don't think they're Modern playable, right? Like I don't think Barad-dûr or Mines of Moria or Rivendell are that insane. Mines of Moria, maybe. We talked about that on our preview episode last time. Rivendell seems just worse than Castle Ventress. If you're playing with a lot of legendary creatures, okay, so Rivendell in a deck with Ragavan does turn your Ragavans into like late game Scry 2s every turn for 2 mana. Like 2 mana Scry 2 is a lot better than 4 mana Scry 2.
Yeah. I think lands with upside, what we've learned in Modern over the years, different conversation for Commander, but and obviously they reference legendary creatures, so in Commander these cards are different. But I think specifically in Modern, what we've learned over the years is if a land is special and is good and is like a utility land, some decks will play 1. Sometimes. Like, it's a thing we've seen. Decks won't go crazy on those cards unless you're talking about like a combo deck that's like using Mystic Sanctuary, or an effect like that. That's the only time you're going to see Modern decks take interesting ETB lands and like go crazy. But if it's just like, this is a pretty good source that can sometimes be untapped, Castle Ventress or something like that, and Modern will see some decks play them as one-ofs. And I don't look at most of these and go, these are crazy good. They all look like the best of them are just okay. So I wouldn't be surprised if a couple of these see a little bit of play, but none of these is reinventing the ring, so to speak.
I disagree on Minas Tirith.
You think it's that good? You think the draw card is strong enough?
2 mana draw card on a land in any for any aggro deck playing white is like,
yeah, but it's still going to enter
name a land that draws you cards for that little amount of mana.
Still going to enter tapped a lot of the time. It's still going to activate for this and tap this and 2 mana. So 3 of your lands, and it also makes you attack with 2 or more creatures, which, like, if you're attacking with 2 or more creatures, you're probably doing that 2 or 3 turns and winning the game. If you're attacking with 2 creatures in a turn and you do that 3 times, it's in a win more situation. Like, if you can do it once, maybe you can like gamble, throw away 1 creature to replace it with a card. But if you're doing it more than a couple times, you're in a situation where you're probably winning anyway. I think that the legendary creature clause on this in Modern,
I feel like I played a lot of decks where like I'm attacking with 2 creatures and not winning the game because of it, but I'm not like, that's just a natural state of flow that I'm like trying to dig for stuff.
You could be right. I don't look at this as, even in those decks, you think you'd play more than one of these? You think like you'd play 2?
I'd play 1. It's a legendary land. I would only play 1 of any of these, in the same ways that I only play 1 of the channel lands, right? Like I don't, and those are like bonkers.
I'd play more than 1 Otawara and Boseiju. Those cards are insane.
Most decks only play like at most 2 Boseijus, and the second one, like, you still don't play that many because you don't want to get stuck with like that's your,
I get it.
Your 2 lands in your hand and you can only play 1 of them, right? Like,
yeah, but even if you play, agreed. These are okay. There's your point. This cycle is worse than the cycle from Kamigawa. That I'm sure of.
Yeah.
How much worse? Not too much worse, but if the Kamigawa lands are seeing play in 1s and 2s, Minas Tirith might see some play. I wouldn't be shocked if one of the others see play from this sequence as well. It's just I don't think that they are like a redefining feature.
I think
you
like
missed
the
one.
Shire, if it's the Shire sees play, it sees play because of Asmore decks, right? Like I think it's very easy for that to see play with Asmore. Asmore is a legendary creature you play in turn 1. The Shire then enters in the battlefield untapped. Those decks are playing green, and the ability for 1 and a green to make a food token and tapping Asmore, who's just like not even a creature you might be attacking with in the late game, is like great. Right? That's the argument for that one being the best, is just like it has a home, and then home wants this card, versus Minas Tirith, Mines of Moria, Rivendell, etc., which don't.
It needs to be pointed out that in general, when sets get spoiled, we don't have this many cards that are real considerations for playable. Like this is pretty high number. Missed
Modern Horizon sets have been.
Yes, true. Those are the,
and this is a Modern Horizon set.
It is. There is one card you didn't list that I saw a lot of chatter online about, and it's just one combo that's been introduced to Modern, and it's Rosy Cotton of South Lane. It's 1 white 2 for a 1/1 legendary creature halfling peasant. When Rosy Cotton of South Lane enters the battlefield, create a food token. Whenever you create a token, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control other than Rosy Cotton. It combos with Scurry Oak, which is green 2 for a 1/2 tree folk with Evolve. Whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on Scurry Oak, you may create a 1/1 green squirrel creature token. So those two in play together, and there have been a lot of cards that combo with Scurry Oak because it's a good card that has a lot of combo implications built in. They go infinite automatically. It's a 2-card combo that makes Scurry Oak infinitely big. That's notable. It's two now. To be totally fair, creatures of 3 cost or less, where you need 2 of them to combo off in green white, there's a lot of options that are not like the most played in Modern right now. You've had a number of them over the years, from Malira all the way to
like the question to me is that better than the Yawgmoth combo, right? That's the real and or is it better than Heliod, which is I guess the real question, because like Yawgmoth combo is better than Heliod combo, which is why green black is the current creature combo deck versus green white. This is a green white combo, and is it better than the current green white combo? And maybe it is, because to be honest, the Heliod combo involves needing Heliod and Walking Ballista, which Walking Ballista is tutorable, but it's weird, right? You need a hero priest, you need other cards to go find it. You can't use Collected Company to bind both. This like could very easily just be a good +1/+1 counters aggro deck that uses Collected Company and doesn't have to have cards that don't do anything unless you're doing the combo, which is a benefit, right? That is a non-zero thing. Also, as a value thing, both of those cards are uncommon. So like if you're looking for a value Modern deck, playing like both of those, Collected Company, some Thalias, some like good creatures, and some Gavany Townships, could just like win an F&M. Like that's like a legit win condition.
That was my point. You took the words out of my mouth there as far as the value. I noticed that these are 2 uncommons, even though Scurry Oak is a card that people like and it gets talked about as like a combo card often. It's still less than $2.
Yeah.
And this card, Rosy Cotton, is not being talked about enough that I think it's going to be very expensive. I think one thing that's super notable, just as a like ending to our review of this, is that there is going to be more product in Collector Booster opened of this set than most sets have ever been, because there's a current offer out on a card that can only be opened in a Collector Booster for $1 million. By the time people are widely opening Collector Boosters, that offer is going to have gone up. It's no longer going to be $1 million. It's going to be like 1.5 or 2, because the set's not even publicly available and it's already $1 million. And as someone who's opened a lot of Collector Boosters, and I know you have 2, what happens is after you open 3 or 4 or 5, you get a little desensitized to everything other than the chase rares at the back of the pack, which means that every single uncommon you open that's cool and a cool like full art foil showcase printing just goes in a pile and eventually gets bulked or put in a box. And Rosy Cotton is that card. 100%. Rosy Cotton is exactly the card that's going to end up, someone's going to have 17 copies of this in full art extended foil that you're going to be able to buy for 18 cents. So there's a version of this in Scurry Oak that is an infinite combo that you can buy for really cheap, that I think is really cool. So I think that that's a notable thing to point out, and it is a 2-card infinite combo that we missed. So, but I think that's the review otherwise.
Yeah. I think like even if there wasn't the One Ring gimmick, right? Even if that didn't exist, I think this would be one of the most open sets of all time. Warhammer is the most successful Commander product of all time, right?
Yep.
And that is Warhammer's popularity compared to Lord of the Rings is not comparable. It's not even in the same
not
universe.
even close. Yeah.
The Stranger Things Secret Lair, the Walking Dead Secret Lair, most popular Secret Lairs of all, right? Like, I don't even think it's close. Like this set's going to be so widely opened that like, it's going to, the cards that are going to be worth a lot from this set is going to be specific. And they're going to be format dominating, which I mean, I'm really excited for this set. We both love Lord of the Rings.
I will say, I think one thing that really stands out to me on that note is like, as a fan of Lord of the Rings and as somebody who's played Magic for as long as I have, and you've played Magic a long time now, I'm really happy that Wizards waited 20 plus years to get into this type of thing,
Sure.
where we have such a baseline of what this game is and what it's like to open cards that are not licensed, that there's going to be a serious influx of players between Warhammer and Lord of the Rings and Doctor Who in these next few years. This is obviously a format for success. And your whole point just now about Lord of the Rings is a really sound one, which is like, if you go to your local game store twice a month to see your friends because you guys play board games, and they're like, hey, Magic the Gathering has a Doctor Who set coming. And you go, I love Doctor Who, and I've always been curious about Magic. I'll buy a box for $200 and open it. Now you're into Magic, right? They've gotten you because you like Doctor Who. And that's a whole new audience and a whole new way of people approaching Magic that's, I think, really special and cool. But that type of thing, if they had done that on year 3, is such a different deal, because now your whole entire base that loves the game is coming from a different, and they might not stick around, and your community might kind of fizzle, and they might, right? Like, that's why, to me, I look at this stuff and I go, man, if the future of Magic is licenses, like if 50% of Magic from here on out is just going to be like big, cool licenses, if that's what it's going to be, all right. We've got 20,000 cards already. Like I have enough cards to build cards with forever without a new card ever being released. So I don't need these cards, but it's dope to have cool franchises. It's cool as a Lord of the Rings fan to get this stuff out there and be able to talk about it. And I think it just makes me happy that
agreed.
we waited this long to do it.
Agreed. Last kind of things. So this was a big announcement. If you follow me and or Ben or Kess stuff on Twitter, we are coming out with a SpyX family card game. We also have the Sonic license game, but the big one right now is SpyX Family. If you don't know the anime, it's really, really cute. It's definitely my favorite recommendation right now on if you haven't watched anime before, a like great first step into the medium. It's about a spy, Cold War era, trying to spy on like another country and get into like a government official, but the only way to get near him is to join a very prestigious private elementary school, and so he has to make a fake family. And so he adopts a random child. That child happens to be a psychic. He then finds a person who's looking to like for a fake husband, because if she's actually a world-class assassin and she doesn't want the government thinking she's a weird person for being single at her age, so she needs a family and he needs a wife. So they get, but no one knows that the other ones are super spies or assassins or psychic. So shenanigans ensue. But we have a card game coming out. Comes out. Demos are at Origins. I won't be at Origins, but the Kess team will be there. We'll have a booth, and then it'll limited release at Gen Con, and then it'll be out this September at stores like Barnes & Noble. It's really, really fun. Definitely recommend it. If you want to learn more about it, please make sure to follow the Kess_ENT socials on TikTok and Twitter and Instagram. It's a new social specifically focused on the entertainment side, so all the licensing stuff we do, and it's really, really fun. It kind of plays, if you've ever played the game, like you're trying to like figure out, you're trying to put together like a poker pair of the perfect family or their best friends from the show, and there's espionage and assassination, and you can get killed, and it's up to 5 players, and it's really fun.
Yeah, and as Kess mentioned, Gen Con, we will not be at Origins. The Kess team will be there, but we will be at Gen Con. We will have a full-on cool booth. You can see the game. You can see that game. He just breezed over it, but we didn't really talk about it extensively on this episode. Sonic, we have a super cool Sonic game coming out that we've worked tirelessly on for the last 6 months. Plus, we've talked about on here before, Mega Man and the other cool properties, Street Fighter, that Kess is doing, which are awesome and really, really, really fun. And we put a huge amount of effort into that. And as you guys have listened to us for the 9.5 years of these 400 episodes, you know how cool it is that a company that Alex started is going to be releasing these properties, tabletop games that are so near and dear to the heart. So I really think if you have a chance to check them out, please do. If you're going to be at Gen Con, come see us. I said we'll both be there, and check out Spy X Family this fall.
Absolutely. And other than that, thank you so much. It's been 400 episodes. It's been really exciting. We've gone through a significant amount of life. For anyone who's listened to every single episode, you are the real MVP. For anyone who's been watching just regularly throughout that period, even if you haven't watched every episode, thank you so much. Big shout out to our patrons. You're the reason we've been able to get to episode 400. Thank you to Channel Fireball, TCG Player. Thank you to the Command Zone for helping us early on when we originally launched as our sister podcast. Thank you to everyone from Marshall, who does all the producing, Rick, who does the editing, Michael, who is one of our co-hosts for a long period of time, Glenn Jones, who started the podcast with me, Ben, for being a co-host for the majority of 400 episodes, more than the majority, 95% of them. And thank you to every guest we've ever had on the show. Just all of you, every one of you. Thank you so much. It's been a wild 400 episodes, and we're looking forward for another 400.
And Renee for recently doing over the course of the last year, tons of social content and sharing all our stuff and developing the social presence with us, which has really been great. So,
and I've definitely forgotten people to thank. It's like the Academy Award. Thank God, my mom, Ash, Whitney, Ben's guitars, especially the ones he's sold Magic collections to buy. Ben's mom and dad and siblings and nieces and nephews.
Yes. So yes, thank you everybody, and it's been a heck of a ride. We hope you enjoyed the episode, and we'll be back next week for episode.
Talk to you all
Check out
next episode.
Don't sleep on that. Go to @KessWiley on TikTok and at the MMcast, because we're doing a lot of unique content.
I just did a whole breakdown on the history of Sarkon, and there'll be more. All right, thanks everybody.
Bye guys.
This has been a production of Time Traveler Media, sending podcasts into the future.